everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Young Filmmakers podcast. It's great to have you with us. As ever, I am joined by...
'Tis I, Dan Allen.
Mr. Dan Allen. Good to see you, Dan. How are you?
Very, very good, actually. Very good, yeah. Got out of bed the right side, and we are flying. Which,
excellent.
By the looks of things, so did our other host. Hello, James.
Hello.
Hello, James. We are joined by our very special regular guest, James Walker, director of the Young Film Academy. How are you today, James?
Hello, guys. Great to be with you. Excited about this. Excited to be talking about having no money.
Yeah, so that brings us, that's also our general state of affairs, but also that brings us on to today's topic, which is talking about no budget filmmaking. So we obviously think this is a really important thing to talk about, especially when you're starting out in your film career, even when you're well into your film career. But James, could you tell us a little bit about what that means to you, the term no budget filmmaking?
Yeah, I think it's really important, this, and I think it's great that you guys are covering this because... that is how every young filmmaker starts out. They've got no money. I mean, who starts out with... look, maybe one or two start out with some very kindly parents who throw them a bundle of cash they'll never see again. But basically, everyone starts out with nothing at all. And what do they have? They've got hopes, they've got dreams, they've got a few ideas, they've got some friends, they have got access to some things, maybe. And I think there's a lot of young people, and we see this a lot at Young Film Academy, who sort of think that because they have no money and because they hear about money a lot. I think that's the other thing about this particular industry is that, when you listen to the news or you look up stuff online, there's a lot of talk about numbers. This has grossed 30 million in its opening weekend, and the budget for this movie was 1.8 million, and the numbers are super high. They're always massive. They're sort of, and for a young person, I think they're just very hard to comprehend. It's like, what's the difference between 400 million, for any of us, and 25? Unless you're someone who's experienced with those numbers. So I think there is that sense that filmmaking and money feel in the media landscape like they're quite together and entwined. So therefore, a young person goes, well, but I don't have money, so I can't do this. And I think the other thing to say is that, theatre, and we've discussed that on another episode, I know, is that sense that theatre is actually quite a cheap way into telling stories. And filmmaking isn't quite so much. That is one of the problems of film, is that you've got to make things happen, and it's very difficult sometimes to achieve that. So I think it's great, this episode, that we're really focusing on how to do it with nothing or almost nothing. Because realistically, no budget is never no budget. You're going to need some budget. And I think it's going to be great to unpick that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And as you said, is it ever really no budget? That's an interesting question that we can come on to. Dan 100%. Looks like he's going to say something on
the only substitute for rich connected parents is hard work.
Wow, that's a good piece of holy grail advice to start us off with.
Absolutely, if you've got all three, then you're on for a home run. As long as you've got some talent as well. But we're going to learn all about how you can actually apply hard work and how you can be resourceful to actually make stuff happen, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So today we're going to be joined by Marc Coleman, who is a friend of the Young Film Academy and the Young Filmmakers podcast. He's a fantastic filmmaker and actor, director, prop maker, producer. I can't actually think of any titles that I wouldn't give to Marc at the moment, but he's just fully finished his first feature film, and we're very excited to have him with us today. Hello, Marc.
How are you doing today, Marc?
Yes, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, very pleased to be here. It's very exciting.
Well, we're very excited to have you. I'm very excited to hear about, your experience making movies, which I think is going to be really interesting to our listeners around the globe. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure. No problem.
So obviously one thing that we love to do here on the Young Filmmakers podcast is hear about where this journey started. So I was wondering if you could maybe tell us, where were the sort of first glimpses of creativity coming through?
Well, I started out as an actor. So many years ago, when I was in my kind of early teens, my sister was an actor, and I was always interested in that. So I started to I did GCSE drama, and then after GCSE drama, I went into and did a BTEC in performing arts as well. And as that was kind of happening at the same time, there was really bad camera phones being made, and I used to have an old kind of camera phone, and I started to make sort of sketches and stuff on it. I was always kind of mainly interested in comedy, so it was all sketches and weird and odd films. I made a film about my cat called Dougal the Contract Killer. It was about he was this contract killer, and there was like fake blood in it, and I made a cat's paw out of a pen and some masking tape to make it look like the cat was holding a knife. I mean, it was, I didn't tell my mum. But it was around that time, yeah. So that was kind of like early teens. So I was always kind of interested in doing making but I didn't realise at the time that I was kind of making little mini films. I suppose I was just kind of filming stuff for the sake of it, because I thought it was funny and I wanted to do it. But my sort of main focus was being an idiot and sort of trying to sort of carve a career as a comedy actor, I suppose.
But already there, you're seeing sort of bits of you just making stuff and sort of getting resources together, whatever that may be, really, to produce a film, even if you didn't really think it was a film back then, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of been a sort of staple of my filmmaking over the years, or I hope it has, and I try my best, is that I was always obsessed with making things as a kid as well. So I briefly kind of worked as a prop maker for a bit in my 20s as well, and occasionally still do now. So that helped kind of cement that stuff as well. It was kind of, well, I couldn't. I was obsessed with monster movies and things being made for nothing. So it was about, well, I could just kind of teach myself how to make it and get lots of sellotape and kind of hope for the best, really.
Very nice. And when did that sort of evolve? Like, obviously you're making sort of, I know comedy's still a focus, but by the sounds of it, you weren't trying to make the film seriously filmically, I suppose. How did that transition evolve so that you started to take the work maybe more seriously?
Probably in my kind of early 20s. So once I was sort of trained as an actor and I started to get out there, and my main focus when I was an actor was in theatre. So I did lots of sketch and lots of improv. Not a huge amount of film, but me and friends always struggled to kind of get in front of casting directors and people that would kind of want to see our stuff. So we decided to kind of make our own sketches and our own films. We didn't really know what we was doing. So we had a kind of cheap Panasonic camera, and we would go out and we would make these kind of fake movie trailers, and we would make very short sketches and short films. And this was kind of the birth of YouTube as well. So we'd kind of stick them on YouTube. And we'd make kind of rip-offs of things. We did like a Britain's Got Talent video. So there was these little things. They weren't great, and we didn't really know what we were doing in filmic terms. We just knew what kind of felt right, where to put the camera at what particular time. And then that kind of, and it did kind of lead to certain things as well. It got us in front of a few casting directors and a few sort of TV bods who were kind of interested in our comedy. And it went on for a bit, and a bit kind of fizzled out to nothing. But what it did do was it made me realise what I was actually interested in, which was filming.
And so, Mark, is that the... oh my God, sorry, I've got a terrible delay in my ear. Wait a second, sorry people. Try that again. Yeah, try that again. So, Mark, was it then, when you first started making stuff, was it kind of like a vehicle for you to almost, if your focus was an actor, was it almost, making something was just a vehicle to get you on screen in some way? Because I think that's quite a lot of young people, that's their way in, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So, talk us through that.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, so there was there wasn't no interest in filmmaking, because I think it was always there from a very young age, but I just never really focused on it because I was so focused on me trying to be funny and be an actor. So it was just there as a staple, but we realised that we just couldn't get the kind of work that we wanted to get. I was watching all these brilliant comedies, and I knew that I wasn't being able to get into the room to be auditioned for those comedies because I was quite a low down the chain actor, I suppose. I didn't have a big agent, and it was quite hard to get a good agent, as it still is, I guess. So yes, it was exactly right. It was just a vehicle that we could put things up on YouTube, and then we could send that out to casting directors and out to people. And weirdly, that still works today, even though YouTube is much, much bigger now than it ever was. It's still a huge platform, if not bigger, in terms of you being able, even though there's more and more people doing it, there's still a very good opportunity for you to put yourself onto YouTube and show your videos, and if they get enough kind of traction behind them, you've still got a very good chance of people seeing it. I mean, the algorithms have changed hugely now, but that's it's still possible for sure.
Nice, yeah. So, I mean, by the sounds of it, that kind of sketch comedy is sort of always sort of lends itself to those online platforms generally pretty well. Because again, I'm sure sort of our listeners would be a lot of them would be interested in making content for that. But as you're saying, the algorithms change, so it sort of favors, I think, longer form content now, or just whichever content can keep you on the website the longest. So you've either got to have lots of videos or some really, really long ones. But even that has its own sort of limiting factors, right? Like doing something shorter, I imagine, is far easier maybe is the wrong word. I don't know what your experience has been like, sort of.
Yeah, it's more about, particularly at the time when we was doing it, so maybe this was around 2010, 2011. It was always about that kind of snappy title and how you have that title and how you get things viewed and seen and stuff. But there wasn't as many people doing it, so you had more of an opportunity, and we were always very much interested in kind of making stuff that was, is it real, is it not real? So we always helped us, because lots of the views we got were people thinking that we would make a fake Channel 4 documentary trailer, and lots of people, even though it was an absurd idea, lots of people thought it was real. So not only, I guess we were kind of tricking them ever so slightly, but it was helping us, it was helping us get our name out there, I suppose, as sort of actor performers.
So give us a sense then, Mark, give us a sense, who was the 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old Mark? Go on, paint us a real life picture of what were you up to when and how much of getting out there and just making stuff were you doing at that kind of age, and maybe give us some real, what were you using, day to day, how did it work? The nuts and bolts of it.
So I was a college student in Barking and Dagenham. So I went to Barking and Dagenham College, and I studied performing arts. So that was between kind of 16 and 19. So while that was happening, I was at college, living the college life, performing, and I was quite a good performer, I suppose. I got invited to do there was lots of older performers who did lots of sort of amateur dramatics. So I ended up doing lots of kind of theatre shows outside of college as well, and then that kind of led to meeting other various contacts and wanting to do various different things together. So again, even between kind of 16 to 19, it was still very much theatre based. There were bits of films. I remember doing a 48-hour sci-fi film festival, I think, when we were like 19, and that was very much sort of nuts and bolts. We didn't have any money to do anything. We just had a camera, and we made this really bad zombie film, and but it was very much sort of get whatever we could and go out there and make something. So there were lots of us who were still very busy during our college days. When we were at college, we were there performing and stuff, but we were also kind of doing stuff on the side outside of college. Maybe just because we wanted to. Even those days, I don't think we planned to do anything with it. We just it was just a good opportunity to kind of do something a bit silly on a camera phone and try and edit it together and then show your friends. That was all it was back then. I never really had any ideas of sending it out to anyone. So that was those days. And then shortly after I left college, then I guess I just focused on working as an actor, I guess, for quite a few years. And that was between sort of 19 and 21. Then I think around 21 was when I realised, I'm not going to be able to get the auditions that I want to get because I don't have that agent, so I should start making my own stuff. So I think all the building blocks were always there. I just didn't really tap into them at the time, and I didn't really focus on them at the time. It was only when I started to realise that I couldn't get the work that I wanted to that I thought, actually, I would prefer to make things as opposed to just be in things. And what it also allowed me to do was that it meant that I was in charge as well. So I would go to an audition and I would get turned down from an audition from a comedy job that I wanted to do, whereas I could write and direct and make my own comedy and nobody can tell me otherwise. They might tell me it's not very good at some point, but I've already made it by then, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Do you think there's a benefit in younger people deciding which side of the screen they want to be on early, or do you think it doesn't matter so much, and it's more just about the process?
Yeah, I'm not sure actually. I have this argument a lot because I only just recently made my first feature film at the age of 35, so I didn't properly go into filmmaking until I was sort of very late 20s, early 30s. So, and as I said, I was making kind of short films up until then, and some of them were good and some of them weren't good. But by the time I kind of got into my 30s, I think I've made a very, very different feature film to the film that I would have made when I was 25 or even 21. So I think there's an argument for making films when you're a bit older, for sure. But I think if I had it my way, I definitely would have done it much, much earlier if I'd realised that that's exactly what I wanted to do. So if there are young people out there who are interested in filmmaking, there's no need to wait around now. I was interested in acting, so I pursued acting for sort of 10 to 15 years. It was only, as I said, later on, I realised that it was filmmaking which was at the core of what I wanted to do. So I would say just go out there and just start making stuff, for sure.
And just a quick one on that, Mark, as well. How do you feel about acting informing filmmaking and filmmaking informing acting? Do you think there's a crossover of things that help you understand what it's like to be on the other side of the camera when you're acting, for example, and vice versa? Has it helped you as a director to understand how actors talk and think about their work?
Yeah, it has actually. That's one of the key things of kind of coming from from being an actor into being a director, is that you are able to. You've been in that position before, and I did some really bad acting jobs where I had to wear ridiculous things and be put in ridiculous situations. So, and I kind of, my work kind of leads to that sometimes as well, people being put in ridiculous situations. So I've kind of been there. So it does make things much, much easier when you are asking something of an actor to go and do something particular. You've been there and you've done that, so you can speak to them on a particular level, for sure.
Super interesting. But obviously were you working with actors quite soon after you made that transition, or were you starring in your own films more often than not in the sort of shorter stuff?
Yeah, the short early stuff was all about, it was about putting us on camera. So the main goal was, let's put us on camera because we want to try and get some jobs from some TV people, and they might like our scripts and they might like our stuff. So I was in the early stuff, but I don't necessarily do that these days. I've kind of I guess I've retired from being an actor, but I never say never. But yes, it was just about us being sort of it was our work, I suppose, and the idea was we were just making these. I guess you would call them self-tapes now. They were self-tapes that we could show people. Look how funny we are, look how ridiculous we are, and maybe we weren't that funny, maybe we were, but and we would just get our friends involved. We get all of our comedy. We were very lucky. We had lots of comedy friends who we used to do sketches with, and so we would kind of get all of those guys in who wanted the similar thing as well. They were good actors. They were sitting around in between jobs. They were keen to kind of get up and do things. So, which is another a sort of great tip that I always have for young people, is that get involved with lots of actors and become friends with actors, and even join a few acting classes just to meet actors. So when that moment comes and you do decide to make your films, you've got people who are interested in you and interested in your story and interested in what you want to do. And if they're not doing anything and they're in between jobs, there's a very good chance that they will want to come down and help you out and be in your film, and they'll get some material out of it at the end of the day. So it's a kind of win-win for everyone, really.
So I think a lot of our young listeners, Mark, will probably be having some form of thought about they want to do maybe something similar to what you did. They might want to go out there and find a vehicle to get them up on screen if they're interested in acting, or if they're young filmmakers of one sort or another, they're going to want to go out there and make something. And they probably at some point their thought is, well, I don't have the money. I don't have the money, and they know that filmmaking costs money. So today we're really talking about no budget films. How do you kind of strip out the money and make something with nothing? So I suppose looking down that lens, because I know you've had some experience doing that later on, but also in those early days, can you sort of let's sort of hone in on that, sort of let's get brass tacks, how do you begin to get over that sense of just not having any money, and what's realistic and not realistic for a young person in that situation?
I think the answer is, the good thing about being young is actually you don't really care about the money. I don't really remember money ever being an issue until I was kind of started to do it on a, I want to say professional level, but even then, you know, it was still very much, we might have had a bigger camera and we might have had a sound person, but even then there still wasn't a huge amount of money. So even in those early days of making sketches and short films, nobody was really interested in money because we were all early 20s. Everyone was still living at home. Everyone kind of had little side jobs. So it was just a case of who's got what, and that's always there's always a good starting point for anything, is that don't go out and make something very grand. Always start with something that you still have, and I still do that to this day. I'll still set a feature film in a particular place that I know that I can get, or there's a cool location that I want to use. So there are a ton of things that on a big production scale they would pay lots and lots of money for, but when you're making stuff at a lower level, there's so much stuff that you can get away with that you just don't have to pay for it. And as long as you're a nice person and you ask very politely, there's always a very good chance that you won't ever have to pay for a location. You know, phones are very good these days in terms of what they can do and what you can film with, and everyone's got a phone in their pocket. And even so, even a good camera isn't a huge amount of money to get these days. I'm sure someone's friend of a friend has got a good camera. There are lots and lots of stuff, you know, and yes, there is money that comes into it. Even in those early days of making sketches, all that early stuff we used to put on YouTube, I think we used to... Yeah, we used to feed people. I remember we definitely used to do that, and that's always a nice thing, is make sure if people are coming down to do something for you for free, at least make them comfortable. Feed them, get them a drink, make sure they're fed and watered and they're looked after, and then people will kind of leave having a good experience. The amount of times I've been up till about 2-3 a.m. kind of making sandwiches for 20 odd people, just so that I can make sure that everyone is happy the next day. I've been doing that for God knows how many years. I mean, I can't. I even did it one night, 2 nights. I had to do it on the feature film when we were on location, and this was only a year ago. I had to drive to Tesco's, 24-hour Tesco's, 10 o'clock at night, and I had to buy lunch for 15 people, and I had to individually put all of those food in various different bags and put everyone's name on it, so that when we were on location the next day, everyone was fed and watered. So I think that's the key, is you can do lots and lots of stuff for pretty much no money. But I think the key is to also to look after your cast and crew, because if you do look after them, they'll come back and they'll do another film with you as well. And you hope that the next time you do a film, there's a little bit more money and you can pay them and stuff.
Super interesting. So you're never really sure, are you, what making a film is going to look like, right? And you just imagine it sort of standing behind a camera, sort of calling the shots or sort of checking your storyboards and stuff. But sometimes it looks like being up at 2 a.m. and making a sandwich.
Yes. Exactly right. Yeah, it's never as glamorous as unfortunately it's never sitting there in that wooden chair with the hat on and the megaphone. It's always, you know, you're always doing a million different jobs, and that's the key. And once I realised that I wanted to make films and I wanted to put my stamp, I guess, on cinema and put my sort of word out there and who I am, that was never going to happen. No one was going to give me any money to do that. So it was always about the only way that I can do that is to kind of go out there and do it myself. And if it means that I am the writer-director, but I'm also the sandwich maker, I'm also the assistant editor, I'm also the prop maker, then that's fine, because it's my project and I will put everything I can into it, and I will take as much load off of everyone else as I can, so that they have to do the minimal amount when they turn up on set as well.
I think that's such a great phrase you just used there, Mark, which is who's got what. Because I totally agree with you. As a producer, that's kind of my starting point as well on a movie, is you've got to sort of work out, you know, at a certain budget level or no budget level, you've got to start with things that are already there that you can realistically get for free. So can you just talk to us a little bit about that, maybe unpick that phrase a bit more, sort of when you start a project, when you're thinking about what you can achieve, sort of what kinds of things are you thinking about when you're thinking the thought who's got what?
I'm probably thinking about locations. Locations is always a big one. It's always like, it's finding cool locations that you know that you can get because a friend of a friend owns that location, or a friend's mum works in a location, for instance. So it's always little things like that, and they all sometimes cement cement the idea. So for instance, as I said, I was always interested. I grew up on kind of monster movies, and so I always wanted to make a monster movie. So I made one of the sort of first professional-ish short films that I made in my 20s was a film about a rubbish monster. And the reason it's about a sort of fly-tipped rubbish monster that comes to life and takes revenge on people with fly tips. Very silly. But the reason it was born out of was because I wanted to make a monster, but I didn't have any real money to make this big prosthetic monster. So why don't we just make it out of rubbish? Make it out of things that are found on the street. Make it out of... It had a kind of washing machine body and a Hoover head, and it was made out of a trolley. And it was a comedy, and it was a very silly monster. But it cost us... The whole thing probably cost us about £50 to make. And I had a brilliant production designer who helped build it, and he did a lot of the legwork in kind of the creating of it. But... and that 50 quid was probably spent on kind of nuts and bolts and things to make it secure, and we ended up making this kind of 8-9 foot sort of puppet monster that could be sort of puppeteered from the inside, and it was all just made out of nothing really. So I wasn't going to go out and try and make a sort of big alien that was going to cost lots of money in prosthetics and blood, because I just didn't have the money to do it. So I sort of tailored it to, well, why don't we make a monster out of rubbish, because that's free and you can find that on the street. And most of it we did, actually. We didn't sort of pay much for it. It was me sort of going through skips and pulling things out of skips wherever I could, that and then I would send those to my sort of production designer and say, yeah, I found this piece of Hoover, do you want to use it?
And with that idea creation process, are you first writing a list of your resources and like, okay, so I've got this, and this. Now I need to come up with an idea out of this, or is it slightly more the other way around, which is I've got these ideas, which one could I make work, or which one could I bring down to a level, or could I be resourceful about? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of both for sure. It's it's getting that fine middle ground, because I like to start with, right, here's what I can get. So is there a film that I could do in that location? And lots of the time that does work itself out, and then lots of times you kind of want to push yourself to get somewhere that's you want to do it the other way round, which is you want to kind of craft, you want to write an idea. And every time I'm writing an idea these days, I always kind of write it in mind that it's a film that I can make. It's not a film that I'm going to have to wait for somebody to come and tell me that I can make or not. And I want to keep trying making those types of films until somebody goes, oh, yeah, that film's all right, we'll actually give you some money this time. And when that happens, then I can hopefully pull out those ideas of what you're talking about, which is I don't need to make a monster out of a washing machine now, or I can make it out of prosthetics and various different things that you would use to make a monster.
So thinking about how things often go wrong, Mark, in a low budget and no budget filmmaking, have you ever had an absolute disaster on set in terms of a location falling through, somebody coming out with chasing you with something and saying you can't film here, or is it all because of the preparation that you put in and you've planned these things kind of from the early stages? Does that kind of avoid those sort of problems cropping up when you're shooting?
Yeah, it's all smooth, right, Mark? I mean...
It's all smooth. I prepare. Yeah, I'm so religious in what I prepare. I really go to every little. I kind of go, and I've kind of learnt this over years, and it's a really fun thing that you kind of end up becoming a producer yourself. And I've got a lot of respect for producers, and they do a huge amount of job. But if you want to make something yourself, you kind of end up being a producer, and you end up getting it off the ground. And it's always important to kind of tick every box and make sure where you are crossing every little thing that you can to make sure that nothing can go wrong. And so you do all of that, and you spend ages doing that, and then everything goes wrong. And then it's just problem solving from then on, really. You hear that quote quite a lot. I'm definitely not the first person to say that, which is that filmmaking is just problem solving. It's working out, and something will go drastically wrong, and you'll lose a location, and then you have to then you've got 2 hours to find a new location to shoot this ridiculous scene in, and then usually what will happen is the new location will turn out to be 4 times better than the original one. And so over the years, there's so many things that have gone wrong, and you kind of just end up making it work. But you have to have that mindset that you're there to. You can't just kind of go, well, that's that location gone then, or that's the monster's broken, we can't do this. we have to call it a day. You have to have that mindset if you have to keep going. There's a little story that Dan, I've spoken to Dan about before. I don't think Dan was there, but during the filming of the feature film, we were shooting one of the final scene. We had a scene on a beach where our creature, our fishman, had to sort of walk off into the water and turn around and look at the camera before he kind of dived in. And the creature's mask had eyes that would come out, as it would make it easier for the actor when they weren't on set. They would be able to breathe properly and stuff. And we had this one final shot to get, and Matty, bless him, who was playing the fishman, we got all the cameras rolling, and he went into the sea, and just as he was about to turn around to look towards the camera, his eyes popped out and they fell into the sea. And so we cut the camera. Everyone kind of scrambled, but obviously they were in the water, so I had to take most of my clothes off and try and get in the water and fish these eyes out, knowing that we still had a day or two left filming with this creature, and we just lost the eyes. So there I was in the sea at about 8 a.m. in the morning in front of about 15 grown men, trying to search around for these eyes, and everyone knew that they were gone. But
at what point did you know they were gone, though, Mark?
And I didn't give up, and I went into that water and I searched for those eyes, and I still didn't find them. But the point I'm trying to make was that everything was riding on those eyes, and we just lost the eyes to the manfish. They floated away, and we never saw them ever again. And we had 2 days left to film with the manfish as well. But, you know, thankfully we were very lucky in the mask maker who made our creature mask. He was very lovely, and he wasn't a million miles away from the location, and he made us a new pair of eyes and delivered them to us the next day, so that we could carry on shooting. But the second part of the story, the fun part of the story, which is quite nice now that it's a year ago, was that our creature actor couldn't arrive the next day to do the pickup shots that we couldn't do because we lost the eyes. So I had to put the creature suit on and recreate the shot. So we had to go to the location the next day. We didn't necessarily have any permits for that day, so it was myself and the DOP and the DOP's girlfriend who was there as an assistant, and I had to put the monster suit on with the help of Ella, DOP's girlfriend, and then I had to go in the sea and try and recreate the actors' movements with our brand new eyes and then dive into the water. Thankfully the weather was pretty much the same, so we managed to, in the edit, we managed to kind of put those shots in. And then now, because of all of that drama, there's now 2 shots in the film where I'm wearing the creature suit, uncredited. I don't want to credit for it, guys. It's all right.
But you finally got yourself back in your movie.
Story. It's a nice little story to have, and that was one of the worst things that ever happened on set, because you kind of see it before your eyes that things are going to go wrong, and you don't know what to do, and you just kind of work it out. Really, there's something lovely about that.
So, let's just talk a little bit about money, numbers, budgets a little bit, because I think there might be young people out there, they're listening to this and they're thinking, what does it mean, what is no budget, what is low budget, because I don't know about you guys, but I was certainly, when I was young, you hear these numbers of movies and they just entered La La Land money. It's like, oh, it's really cheap, we've made it for only 16 million, this one, and you sort of like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Even now, the numbers just can be enormous.
You guys don't have that in your bank?
If you're a sort of 14 to 19-year-old and you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, kind of, what is my absolute minimum? Because I think, as we've talked about already, kind of no budget is a misnomer. You're never going to do it off literally 0p. Talk us through sort of what advice would you give just in kind of absolute terms? Like, what is the lowest you could go out and do something on, and maybe a music video is better than a short film or vice versa? Like, what's your feeling on that?
You could, if we talk about short films for sure, which is a sort of a ground that you should definitely start with. I mean, you can start with going out and making a feature film. That would be very bold and a good learning experience. And I wouldn't say don't do that, but I think a good way of doing it is starting with shorts, where you're only shooting for 1 or 2 days, or even a day, and it's a good way to kind of craft. And actually, telling a short story is extremely hard than it is kind of telling a feature story. So first and foremost, that's a good thing to learn anyway, is how to craft a story within 10 minutes. But also, The money comes from, I guess, like I said earlier, lots of the money will probably be spent on keeping everybody happy. So just on sandwiches, on how you're going to feed people. And there's a million things you can find online about how to feed a crew of people for very cheap. Lots of people will do kind of pizza and pasta and things, and which are always good. So money will definitely go on food. I think you can always, depending on what you're filming, and you're young and you're very polite and maybe you have something else to offer, but I think you can always find locations for free. I don't think I've ever really paid for... I've paid for 1 or 2 locations, and it was only because we needed them for a few weeks. But even then, we only gave the people who had those locations like a few £100s. You know, on a normal set, they would give them for a morning, and we managed to get this sort of 70s looking house that was being sold, and we got it for a few £100s for 2 weeks. So, and it was just a nice gesture. And the only reason the lady gave it to us was because we were very polite, we were very lovely, and she loved the idea that we were kind of independent filmmakers going out there and making something for nothing. And that's the key. It's kind of it's putting as much of that money as you can on screen and not kind of spending it in weird and wonderful places. If you buy all of your crew, if you've got a cast and crew of 10 people, and you buy everyone a takeaway for kind of lunch and dinner, you're probably going to end up spending quite a bit of money on takeaways. And when that money could have gone on screen, you could have made everybody lunch. And it doesn't mean that you have to make everybody really bad meals. There's lots of nice meals that you can make people for not much money. And then it means that the rest of that money you were going to spend on expensive takeaways, that can be put onto screen or can be put into useful departments. For instance, sound is something that you should never kind of scrimp and scrape on as well. Where possible, get the best possible sound you can get. And even if you're shooting at a really low level, that could even be an iPhone sellotaped to a broom pole, and you're getting it as close as you possibly can to the actor's face without it actually being on screen. That's probably a terrible idea. I've never tried it. I mean, it could work, actually, thinking about it. But my point is that you're putting the money in the right places. So yes, I think I've been making films for nothing for many, many years, but there is always money that needs to be spent. And I guess it's you choosing wisely on where that money should go. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, props. What about stuff like props, costumes, stuff like that?
Yeah, again, props and costumes. I mean, props, as I said, I've worked as a prop maker, and I still kind of class myself as a prop maker. I don't necessarily... I'm a prop maker for my own film, so I usually make and source everything. I've got a production designer friend who I work with all the time, who's brilliant as well, and he's very similar in his approach, that he can make something for nothing. And so all of that stuff is just beg, borrow and steal. I remember having to put an ad out on a Facebook group for a dog cage that we needed to put a human being in, and obviously I got loads of weird comments from that straight away. And I was like, no, don't worry, guys, I'm not doing anything weird. Please trust me. And again, somebody lent us their sort of Labrador-sized dog cage for a few days so that we could shoot a scene where a manfish gets put in a dog cage, and but it didn't cost us anything. It was just a really good place to start. I mean, again, this is maybe because I'm a bit older and it's a good place to start, but Facebook community groups are always a really good place. And I end up shooting lots of my work in and around where I live because I play the local filmmaker card, and it means that I can get stuff for free. So people are very supportive of if you're a local filmmaker and you're going to make something and you need a dog cage and somebody will lend you a dog cage. I once borrowed an axe off of a Facebook community group. Again, lots of odd comments. And but it was all free, didn't cost me anything. And so props and costumes, lots of costumes. You can get lots of, depending on what you're filming. If you're filming a period piece, it might be harder, but you can get lots of actors always like the idea of kind of putting their own touch on costumes as well, particularly at a lower level, and sometimes they'll bring stuff to the mix that you never would have thought of, and it's brilliant for their character and they feel comfortable in it. So you can definitely get actors to kind of wear their own clothes, but if there's certain particular pieces, we got help from a local theatre who had a wardrobe of clothes and clothes and clothes, and particularly if you're young as well, I'm sure there are colleges and drama departments that have rails upon rails of costumes. So again, your costumes can dictate your story as well. If you can get your hands on 6 police costumes and you can get your hands on a graveyard, there's a very good chance that you're going to set some sort of scene with police officers in the graveyard, for instance. So it's just about understanding where these things come from and how you can get them for free, and making sure then that money is going in the right places. And again, it's just about being it's just about being polite with, making sure that when you return those costumes, they come back exactly the same way. It's about when I borrowed that axe, we covered that axe in blood, and I made sure that when the axe went back, it was not covered in fake blood. It was as exactly how it looked. Same with the dog cage, same with the house that we had for 2 weeks. There were sort of 10, 20 cast and crew members in that house at one point, all eating, all living in the same place. And it turned into a bit of a tip at points, but myself and the producer and the first AD all made sure that before we left that house, it looked better than it did before we arrived. And that's the key, I think. And then it means that if I need something else again from the future in those people, they'll happily help out.
And lastly, words of advice you'd give to yourself back in your teenage years?
Words that I'd give to myself in my teenage years? Oh.
From a film perspective, not just like a social and cultural perspective. This is always a strange question, because I feel like this can get asked quite a lot, is the advice that you would give yourself. And I think it's just about, I wouldn't worry too much about just what it is you want to do. And as I said, I focused solely on acting for a good sort of 10 to 12 years, and I loved every minute of it, and I don't regret it. And as I said earlier, is there a part of me that would have liked to have done filmmaking earlier on? Maybe there is. But I think the key is once you know what it is you want to do, whether that be filmmaking or whether that be acting or it be bricklaying, whatever, I think just dive in 100%. I think I may have done that over the years, is that maybe I didn't give it as much as I could have. And I'm now paying for that later on, because I'm now giving it 110% of every job that I do. So I think if you start early and give it everything that you have, then there's no reason why you're not going to come out good on the other side, whether that be with a good film, or you've just learnt a good lesson, or you've learnt a bit about yourself, whatever that may be. I think it's about just giving it everything you can and not doing it half-heartedly. Amazing. Thank you so much, Mark. This has been really wonderful.
No worries. Thank you.
Excellent. That was so great to hear from Mark about his journey into filmmaking, and I found it super interesting to hear about all the kind of challenges and the things that you have to think about. It seems to me like there are, coming from an actor's perspective, and more recently I've been kind of directing for theatre and moving into filmmaking in a very early way, but it just seems like there are so many things to think about when you're starting off that process. It's
really just sort of like putting on that producer's hat, right? Like, even though Mark was saying he's coming at this from a writing and directing perspective, and that's how he sees himself. And I think he never really referred to himself as a producer, but what he described to us constantly throughout the conversation is just non-stop producing. That's what I got from it.
Well, I think that's right. As a young filmmaker, if you are, a teenager and you're making something and you're the driving force of it, you are by nature its producer, and you have to do absolutely everything. Yeah. And be prepared to do that. And I think, I was really struck by, I thought Mark's phrase was so interesting, which is, that sense of building what you do around what you've got. And actually that I still very much work like that when I'm producing stuff now, exactly like Mark says, because I think, it's one thing if you've got a huge, literally millions and millions of dollars, and you then go, great, well, it's set on a spaceship or on a distant planet, or it's set in Regency, Spain or something. But if you don't, then you've got to build around what you've got. And I think that's a great tip for young filmmakers, is to sort of almost like join the dots, is to work out what are the dots that I can actually get. Yeah. Okay, well, I can get access into a barn, and I've got there's a church that I think I'll be able to film around, and then I've got someone's apartment. How can I join those location dots? And then you add in a few things. Well, my friend's got a scooter. Great. Get that in there for a bit of production values. And then someone I know does a bit of, has got a weird leather suit like Elvis. Great, let's get Elvis in there. And you sort of almost like one of those games. You're putting those elements together, knowing that you can do that
like a
for
Christmas
free.
Cracker game, like one of those Christmas Cracker puzzles when you got.
I was going to say like Cluedo as well. It's like Dan with a leather suit on a scooter outside a church.
And there's a fear as well, right? Because that sounds so arbitrary or like really dry. But I always my personally thing that I do with creativity is just sort of setting yourself the challenge. Okay, but what would my version of that story be? What would make that really interesting to me? And I think the moment you spin it round and you do that kind of questioning with those resources, with that Cluedo style sort of thing, that's when you can go, oh, I know what would make that really interesting to me, you know. And if you can answer that question, then I think you're completely on a roll to make a hopefully really good film.
Yeah, and I think it's also kind of worth saying, you know, briefly, I've also had loads of ideas in my brain that have been floating around for 15 years that haven't quite found a home yet. But I know, you know, one day I'm going to walk into a churchyard locally, or I'm going to find something that I think, oh my God, those two things are just going to line up now, because I've had this thing for ages, but I didn't quite know how to let it, you know, I couldn't make it at the time, but the idea didn't go anywhere. It was still there. And suddenly, you know, as time passes, you think about a different way of solving that problem or a different possibility. And I think that's what's really exciting about it as well. It's not all kind of linear, is it? In terms of you come up with an idea, you make that film, then you move on to a new idea. You know, most of us have kind of several things running at the same time, and it's just a case of what we can make in that moment with what we've got. But equally, those other things that are sort of parked in the background for now often find a way of being made eventually as well.
And I think there's a creative springboard that's really useful to that. You know, we're all fearing the blank page, right? You know, that terrifying thing of, oh, I've got nothing. And it's very difficult to make that first creative step to have something. And actually the joy of the no budget approach is, okay, so you go, what can I get for free? And then you started with something, and it's actually much easier to then start with those things and find a way to join them in a story that makes sense and is cohesive and is emotionally impactful, or whatever it is you're trying to do, than to start with nothing. And I'm really reminded, I was fortunate when I was young, I was taken to a thing called the Berlinale Talent Campus, which is part of the Berlin Film Festival, and I was about
very
22 at the time.
For those that don't know.
And it was the first one they'd ever done, and the idea was to take the top 500 young filmmakers, I think that was classed about under 25 at the time, from around Europe, and every country sent their sort of, you know, what they consider the cream of their crop. And we got some amazing people talking to us, and I remember Thomas Vinterberg, who's from the Dogma movement, and he started talking to us, and he was talking about the paralysis of money. Essentially this idea that when someone comes to you and says, what do you want to do? I'll give you as much money so you can set it anywhere, do anything. You essentially have got that problem. You've got nothing to start from, and you could do anything, but that's exhausting. And he found it paralysis. Whereas, you know, in his previously, the Dogma movement was all about, because they were film students, they had no money whatsoever. And they came up with this theory that if they gave themselves a manifesto, where basically all of their perceived disadvantages were in fact advantages, because they had made themselves rules. So they made rules like, you can't use any weapons, because they didn't have weapons and they couldn't make them look good, and they didn't have special effects, so they were like, great, we're not allowed them. You weren't allowed any music in your film that wasn't recorded at the time of filmmaking. So someone playing a violin was on the set, fine, but you couldn't have a composer. So they set themselves all these rules. And they made some amazing films, and you may have heard some of them: Dancer in the Dark, The Idiots, Festen, famously. You know, the incredible pieces that came out of, essentially, they had to go, well, we've got this house, and we've got these actors, and we've got this thing, let's make a story out of it. And he found that very freeing, whereas creatively, having tons of money to do whatever he want. And he said, you know, he just made a film with Claire Danes, and he said, it's nowhere as good as the films that I made for no money.
That's what happened with Danny Boyle, right? For like Danny Boyle, obviously director of Slumdog Millionaire, did Yesterday recently. He went to Hollywood. He was a successful British filmmaker, went to Hollywood. I think he made a film called The Beach with Leonardo DiCaprio, and basically didn't like it. Didn't like the experience. He likes, I think he's publicly said, he likes trying to make things work than having sort of too many resources, because it's that difference between responding to stuff and just, yeah, as you're saying, sitting there with a blank piece of paper and here's my piece of page, and working out what to put on it, you know.
Is that going to be the title of your autobiography, Dan?
Piece of page.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's an absolute piece of page.
Absolute piece of page.
We're going to make that work, guys. That's going to take off. I can feel it.
Yeah, no, you know what? When this takes off, and this is like a home run smash hit, we can sell T-shirts that just says piece of page, you know?
See, I thought that was really interesting, and I thought that also that idea that Mark was talking about, you know, as a young person, you actually have a lot of advantages with no budget filmmaking, because you can go to people as a 14, 15, 16, this 17-year-old, etc. And you can ask them, and if you ask them nicely, and if you, I suppose that was the other thing, is get them on board what you're trying to achieve with your project. If they can kind of invest in even your story a bit, and you can personalize it. And Mark's saying, he finds it much easier to do things locally, because if he's making a local story, he is the story, and they'll help that local filmmaker. And if people can buy into what you're trying to achieve, then actually you'd be amazed what you can get. And I'm reminded of, there's a famous story about some kids, you can look it up on YouTube, who made a version of Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it was shot-for-shot remake. And they actually got on to a nuclear submarine. Eventually it took them 10 years, and they just wrote to the general of this base. Wow. And they wrote in year after year after year. And they got no response, but they kept trying. And eventually, apparently the general was like, they're just not going to give up, these kids. And he said, basically, you've got 1 hour on the submarine and don't press the big red button. And they got, for free, the chance to film on a nuclear submarine. And it's that sense of, if you can get people on board and be persistent as necessary, you'd be amazed what you can get.
Sorry, you go, Larry.
No, it's all right. I was just going to say, there's something about asking, isn't there? I mean, for me, I feel like even as an adult filmmaker, I feel like there is a big barrier. I feel like there's a big mental barrier to asking for things and being cheeky and kind of finding like your filmmaker personality. It's almost like performing a character, even if as a person you're really shy, you're just, like me, a total film nerd and just really happy sitting, behind a camera or just being quiet in the background. Is there a persona that you can find? Can you emulate somebody that can just walk in somewhere and be like, this is what I need, please can you help me with it, how can I help you, you're going to get a film credit in a really awesome film, and kind of do that pitch and do that kind of, I suppose, perform that persona of somebody who's really confident, even if you're not. I think that's how people must do it, because I just always thought that everybody else knew something that I didn't, but I think it's just giving it a go.
I just used to tell people that I was a student, which, for a large period of time I was, and for a pretend period of time afterwards I said I was, and you're just like, I'm a student, I've got no resources, and then you sort of like have to feel a bit guilty as your sort of big camera crew and like
drive off
huge
in your
camera sort of turn up on set. But the reality is, that stuff's borrowed, and you genuinely do have no resources. And when you can stop saying that you're a student filmmaker, it's like, okay, I've got to approach this in a different way. My method is just to find like a bad cop producer that just sort of like, waltzes in with sunglasses on and just be like, right, we're going to use your shed. And they're like, who are you? And they're like, I'm a producer. And I'm very excited. I'm very excited if you're out of London, that is. If you're outside London, people are genuinely very excited for you to be filming in their space. In London, everyone knows what the value of a location is and generally tries to charge you, unless you happen to know someone or know someone that owns the space. So I think if you were in the countryside, you were in a privileged position, actually, to find very exciting and interesting resources.
Well, also, and I think that's a really good point, and that idea of, finding places where there's not tons of people using that thing, is much easier than it's trying to film in a tube station and get permission to film in a tube station. Just forget it. They're just not going to do it. And I do think it's about, from a young filmmaker's perspective, anyone asking for permissions, think, what's this person going to get out of it? You do have to think a bit like that. And on the one hand, they might be friends, fools, and family, which is the phrase that's used for sort of people who fund, early no-budget filmmakers, even people who put in, a few quid. That's okay. But if it's not friends, fools, and family, you are going to have to start getting creative. It is that sort of, you'll get a credit on our movie. Can we film something for you? That's another way in, is to say, sort of, if you actually have you're proficient with a camera and you have a microphone, you'd be amazed. Let's say you want to use a laundrette. That laundrette gets no value from you shooting your movie, but maybe they want a short, 30-second interview that they can use on their website. And can you do a bit of a quid pro quo barter arrangement where you say, listen, I can do an interview with you and I'll edit it for you, and in response, can we use the laundrette for 2 hours?
Like
I think
a skill
so. It's
swap.
Creative.
Yeah. And I think that's an important thing to think about from an actor's perspective as well. I think a lot of us, you know, when we're starting out, are really keen to get kind of material and to work for free, you know, and to work with really up and coming filmmakers and things. And I think, you know, there's a lot of lessons to be taken from that, I think, which we can obviously delve into at some other point. But I think there's something about really making sure there's value for you in terms of, do you actually like the story? Are you interested in playing a character like this? Do you like the filmmakers? Can you see anything else they've made? Do they give you a nice sandwich? It's all about those really important parts of being looked after, like Mark was talking about as well. And I think but I think there's also something about where you put your energy. You know, actually, a lot of the time when I've got onto a very, very low budget thing that I've done, I've thought, God, actually, me and my friends could do this better. You know, there's something we could do better here, and I can take this experience away and think, you know, maybe there's something that we could do that could serve us better as well. And in the sense that creating our own story or the characters that we want to play, you know, I think that's something to keep in mind.
And the whole sort of food thing is like doubly important because people are aware that they are not, well, they're doing your film for free, they're not being paid. They're more likely to be aware of that fact if they are hungry, because the hungrier you are, you know, we've all seen the Kit Kat commercials. You're not you when you're hungry. Or is it Snickers? I don't know. It's one of those.
Snickers, yeah.
Is it Snickers?
I'm on the
yeah.
wavelength, yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas in actual fact, when you do a biscuit commercial, as I have a couple of times, the last thing you are is hungry, actually, at the end of it,
imagine.
because you've eaten 340
Do they give you
biscuits.
a bucket to, like, spit it out
Yeah,
afterwards?
I mean, who wants to spit in a bucket in front of the film crew, though? I just take it. I'm like, I'm gluten-free, but never mind, just bring it on.
And then you got to keep putting it in your mouth even for the next take, aware that there's, like, a bucket of this sludge growing in the...
And looking like you enjoy it, Dan, that's the worst part. You got to look like you enjoy it, that's
That's
skill.
where the skill comes in, do you know what I mean? You didn't train at drama school for nothing.
Exactly.
You look like you're enjoying that biscuit.
My relationship with my mother, I don't think ever recovered from her catering one of my films. And she was stupid enough to. I think she was trying to be really supportive and really lovely. And she's, you know, I can't remember if she offered or I asked. I think I asked actually, but it was that sense that I thought she probably wants to sort of spend a bit of time with me, surely. And this is a way of seeing what I'm up to, seeing what I'm doing. So essentially, her way of giving to the film financially was to both do the work of preparing the food but also to buy what was necessary. So she amazingly kindly sort of said, well, I'll cater for it, and she did, and really massively impacted our relationship negatively. But no, we got over it in the end.
Yeah.
You know, film sets are so maybe don't do that.
Unless you're on the inside of filmmaking, I think it's actually really hard. Because I have very similar stories, James, which sort of ultimately, unless you're in that filmmaking vehicle, it's really, I think, hard to appreciate. Especially because of like timings and stuff. I think I annoyed my mum because we weren't ready to eat lunch on time, and it's like nothing happens on time on a film set, you know. So I'm very sorry we're not ready, but she was just worried about letting the crew down, you know what I mean? She wanted it to be
basically the lesson is sorry and thank you to all our mums who have supported us. If you're out there and you have parents daft enough to support you in your creative endeavours,
100%.
But hopefully they love you. And I think that there's one other thing that I wanted to bring up from that interview, which was that sense of using junk, actually, and it's something I've always been quite interested in. I know a filmmaker who does loads of like sci-fi stuff, and he's amazing at, he builds like cockpits for like fighter, like type, you know, sort of spacecraft, and he literally goes to a dump, and you have to ask permissions, and you have to be careful. It's not quite as easy as just rocking up a dump, you know, you have to make sure that, because of health and safety and whatever, but he basically cobbles together bits of old pipe work and then incredibly creatively puts them together and then gets these super high production value shots that honestly look like you're in Star Wars or something, because that's how Star Wars was originally shot. I mean, it's literally just a cockpit and it's being shaken around, and there's
lightsabers are like loads of random parts, right? Like there's a video breaking down what the hilt is, what the top bit is. A lot of it is like photography devices that have been like soldered together, essentially.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, the original lightsaber was not designed at all. It was literally just what can we get and how can we do it, and then it's become this iconic thing. Now they're designed, obviously. Now people draw them and design them. But yeah, that was a makeshift hodgepodge it together thing. So that's where you can start, guys. But I think it's good to leave it there. Before we stop, maybe we got a time for a question from one of our listeners today, guys. which is from Jimmy. So Jimmy is a Young Film Academy student, actually, which is our partner organisation. We do film courses for teenagers and for people from the age of 8 up, actually. So Jimmy's been on one of our courses and wants to get himself a camera of his own, which is great. We get this question quite often, and it's essentially, what camera should I buy? And that's really tricky to answer because there's so many factors at play here, right? Like how much money can you spend is one of the main ones. You know, if you've got an iPhone or equivalent high-end phone, you probably don't appreciate quite how good that camera is. So the main thing you want to do is give yourself versatility. So if you're coming from a camera phone, the best thing that I would recommend is looking at affordable digital SLRs, which actually can cost less than a phone, but give you interchangeable lenses. But just bear in mind, neither of these things, as you guys know, mean you're going to get good sound. The picture's going to start looking good, but the sound will be naff because the camera's still miles away from where your actors are, most likely.
And do you think there's any merit in getting a second-hand camera, Dan? You know, if there was a place to source kind of a digital SLR, as you said, but that may have been used kind of briefly before or whatever, is there any merit in that to try and get something a bit cheaper?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great shout. And there's probably, I'm trying to think of good places to do that. Like CEX probably give you some kind of guarantee for a limited window of time. That at least means you're not going to be given something that's rubbish. So I'd be sort of skeptical about going like Facebook Marketplace for maybe something like that, because it's not easy to observe whether everything's going to be completely functional from the off. But anywhere that can give you a brief guarantee for at least you to go out and try and make a film and encounter some issues. Certainly,
there's some used photography companies on the net, aren't there, that you can, if you just Google used camera, used photography, and there are sites that will do that, and they essentially make sure that it is functioning. They kind of give it a check through, and they'll sell it at, it is not as cheap as if you bought it from someone on eBay, but it's much cheaper than new.
100%. And this is maybe is slightly too technical, but EF series lenses are sort of still popular on big shoots, which basically means if you're going to get a digital SLR, it's generally recommended that you get a Canon if you're doing it primarily for video. So whether that's like a I was going to say it, 550D was like the first one I had. I'm not sure whatever their equivalent is now. It might be a 650D or 700D. But like
I've got a 1200D down, but that's about 6 years old. So I mean, don't take my word for it.
No, yeah. So, but one of those, an affordable one that shoots video, maybe 4K these days. But you're then going to need a computer. So 1080p is fine. People still screen movies in 1080p.
And I've got, I can see a question here coming in from Siobhan, who is 17 from Harrogate. And she's saying, do I need to pay my actors or can I just ask for favours?
So I suppose there are a couple of ways of doing this. I think really it kind of picks up on what Mark was saying. It's about building relationships with people. So, I think everybody is happy to do somebody a favour, once or maybe even twice if they really love working together. And it's about thinking about what they get out of it. So, for example, the reason you would do something unpaid as an actor, obviously, is to get material for your show reel, is to get the experience of being on set, is because you love the script, you love the part. There's got to be something in it for that person. So really just, if you are asking a favour of somebody, think about what that could be that you're giving them. I think there has to come a point where once somebody's done a couple of favours for you, either you say, I'm going to write the next film for you, what do you want to do? And you work together as collaborators, or you have to find something in the budget. I mean, there are kind of websites as well, like mandy.com, where you can advertise unpaid roles for actors. And as an actor, it's under the opportunities section rather than the jobs section. So that's the difference of whether you're paid or not for those things. But I think there does come a point, I think equity minimum for a really, really low budget thing is about 67 quid a day for an actor. It's not a lot, but if you could pay them that for 2 days plus 20 quid for a train fare plus lunch, you're going to get that person coming back to you and you're going to have invested in something that they feel is worthwhile as well. So I think it's always worth considering, if you can pay them, could you just give them something, but also making sure that the crew are aware, if everybody's not being paid and then the actor is, why that is, because also that can come between you on a film set as well. So I think, yeah, it's a really good question from Siobhan, and I think it's about kind of looking at what you've got within your means and also just making it work from the other person's perspective. What are you offering them? And
also get your brothers and sisters in it. Get your friends. And I think they're the most likely people. When you start, that's how so many filmmakers have started their careers is, I think there's a story that Steven Spielberg made his first film in his back garden and his mother played Hitler as a Second World War epic. They're the most likely to do it for free. So get them involved.
List foreshadowing there, I think.
Definitely. So join us again on the next episode of Young Filmmakers Podcast, where we'll be chatting to Charlie Field, who is an experienced screen actor and generally lovely human. See you then.